because at the end of the day, I was embarrassed because there were people there too that didn't know that I had alopecia. So it just tried to embarrass me for like on something that you actually know nothing about. So it was a really bad moment for me, and it always comes to my mind whenever I feel down. So another moment that comes to my head too sometimes where um I was working for someone one time. So sometimes I go to a place, I go to a house, and okay, she actually knew I was bored, but I don't think I've ever been in her house before and removed my scarf. So that day, um, our children, one of them, they were actually really small kids. I think the eldest was like maybe 6 or so. The sister was like, I think 4. So they just came, they were playing, and they just dragged off my scarf and they just started singing around the house. Afari Kolondo, Afari Kolondo. So they just started singing and they were running about my scarf. And I was just thinking, ah, give me back, give it back to me, show you get. I was trying to be staying and not let it get to me because I knew they were kids. And their mother sat there and she didn't do anything. She didn't stop them. She didn't say. I think she was just even laughing like, like she just felt like they were playing with me. But I feel like as an adult, you should have seen my reaction. You should have known that this is a very sensitive thing for me, and you should have even tried to educate your children. She didn't do that. She just till I managed to get my scarf from them, and that was a really bad day too for me.
So I was leaving my hostel one night, and I was going to get something in the shop. I was leaving my hostel, and it was really dark. But the way it was dark, you could see lights, like shadows and stuff like that. So you really could see that I was wild. And I passed. There were a couple of people talking and whatever. So I passed this guy, and immediately I passed, this guy said "scarecrow," and I was like, maybe I did not hear what. Because I was walking with my friend. Maybe I did not hear. And I dragged that to the back. And I came to the back again. And I passed, like, when you're intentional. When you're intentional about it. So I walked slowly this time. And he said it this time. I was like, wow. I turned back and I looked at him. And he didn't say anything. So yeah, that was one of the most awkward and most insane names I've ever been called. Yeah, scarecrow.
There are several kinds of alopecia, and they all include some level of hair loss. There's patchy alopecia, which causes patchy hair loss. This can progress into alopecia totalis, which causes total hair loss on the scalp, and alopecia universalis, which causes total hair loss all over the body.
The percentage they actually know about alopecia firsthand, very, very small, very small. Like in my years of living on this earth, on this planet Earth, just 2 persons have actually firsthand acknowledged that, okay, this is alopecia, I know what it is. But the rest, they're all just a bunch of worried assumptions.
While there is currently no cure for alopecia areata, the burden of alopecia for many that suffer from it is more mental than physical. With more knowledge, awareness, and empathy, we can make things better for those who are living with alopecia.
Hello, good to see you and thank you for tuning in. I'm Felicity Ezewike. AGRA, an acronym for the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, is unequivocal in stating in its 2023 Agricultural Status Report on the status of Africa's food systems that we are not on the right track. Emissions, hunger, biodiversity, nutrition, among other key metrics, are all heading in the wrong direction. So, as the world's political and business leaders gather in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania for the Africa Food Systems Forum Summit 2023, the goal is to facilitate discussions and agreements on practical actions and solutions that will drive Africa's food security efforts. And the theme, Recover, Regenerate, Act, Africa's Solutions to Food Systems Transformation, captures this. Now, among key discussions to be had, there will be some real focus on the campaign to make beans, yes, beans, the answer to food insecurity in areas affected by climate change across Africa, with a spotlight on Kenya. Half of Kenyans eat pulse daily, despite the country not producing enough beans. This is according to the Global Diet Quality Project. And like most crops, the climate crisis has affected bean farming. Unpredictable weather patterns have made it challenging for farmers to cultivate beans and get good harvest. A coalition of proponents are expected to present a roadmap for increased production and consumption of beans and similar foods like lentils and peas. One slot today looks at the forum's goals and Kenya beans production campaign. My guest is policy analyst Maliba Arnold. He joins me from Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you very much for giving us your time.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Now, where does Africa currently stand in terms of food security, and what are your hopes with this summit in Tanzania?
You know, food security in Africa, of course, are two things that keep on being discussed. I think for the last, I've looked at papers and publications, and that has featured in the last 50 years. Straight away to probably why Kenya will actually be an important focus at this particular point. 67% of Kenya is semi-arid. That is one thing that a lot of people do not know. When you go out there, they actually think that Kenya is quite green. On the extreme east of, or rather on the extreme end of East Africa, over 60% being semi-arid, and only about 14% of the country being arable. That is why Kenya has had quite a number of challenges when it comes to food security. That is not so much different with the rest of Africa because whereas Africa has got sufficient land mass to feed its people, we still depend largely on food from elsewhere. You realize that countries like Ukraine, even in war, Ukraine is still sending grain to Africa. That's why the Black Sea Initiative was something that a number of what I would call African elders left the continent, went to try and mediate for peace, specifically for grain. So for food security, I think it's like peace in Africa, not well done.
So what are your hopes with this summit? What do you see coming out of it in terms of, you know, uplifting our efforts?
Well, my hopes are that if you look at what has happened in the last about 15 years, these talk shops have actually continuously turned into places where we then speak to each other and provide local solutions. Specifically, if you're talking about beans, you know, in places like Kenya, where we have got quite erratic weather, more than half the country is semi-arid, you realize that beans can actually be very resilient. Half of cultures actually, not half, actually literally every culture consumes beans in my country. And it's easy to actually work around. I said it's resilient. We are coming up with varieties that can actually not just cook faster, but also mature faster. You can get quite a good harvest out of a very small place. And over and above, the good thing about beans is that they actually add nitrogen to the soil. And of course, it complements the number one food crop in this country, which is maize. So when you do mixed farming with beans and maize, you realize that it's complementary. beans being legumes are actually putting nitrogen into the soil. And on the east of Africa, maize is actually a big thing. I know in the west, rice is a big thing, but on this particular end, we do a lot of corn. So my hope is that we really are going to continue speaking to solutions that are homegrown, issues that speak to resilience. You know that at the moment we are having the African Climate Summit in Nairobi, and whatever will be happening in Dar es Salaam is just feeding into the agenda that is currently happening in Nairobi.
Okay. Experts that I've read on the subject submit that the greatest puzzle, you did agree that there is some challenge in transforming Africa's food system has to do with governance issues generally. Do you agree?
Actually, there are three ways of solving food security in Africa. Number one, you have to stabilize income because, either you're stabilizing income or stabilizing food security, food production for those who are already doing it well, because of climate change, of course, and so many other things, other factors, production has gone down. The same thing is happening on incomes. So if you can't farm, at least you should have income that can afford you food. So that is a governance issue. Stabilizing income or stabilizing production is a governance issue. Two, of course, for places and individuals who do not have sufficient. So you either raise their income, help them get their income going up, or those who are into production, help them raise, if they're doing subsistence farming, to also come up. Again, a governance issue. And finally, of course, there's the issue of social justice. There could be in spaces where there is sufficient food, but then the ecosystem makes it so difficult for people to access it. And even if you're accessing it at a higher price. So the issue of social justice then comes in. It's, of course, through and through, you're not going to rather address food issues without dealing with the issues of governance. And I've just spoken to, at the socioeconomic level, what should actually be done. So yes, governance is a big issue. If we fix our governance, we are likely to fix food security.
Okay, so there's a reason I asked the question, because the summit is pulling all kinds of people from all sectors to see how we can improve on Africa's food security. So what can they do, such a summit? How can they help in ensuring that there is some sort of synergy in the way that governments work with towards improving agricultural produce across board?
First of all, I think I'm either forgetting, it should be either the Malabo Declaration or the Maputo Declaration that I can actually clear up my mind later on, that actually has asked African countries, the African countries signed and committed to domesticating a policy that ensured that at least 11% of national budgets go to agriculture. None of our countries have actually done that in sub-Saharan Africa. Yet you will actually look at our budgets and realize that they are quite substantive budgets that are going to items like defense, security, and other issues. Agriculture has not been sufficiently funded. And so speaking towards that, and then you realize that a lot of the people that we are looking towards to feed us, whether it's the West, even in America, you realize that agriculture is highly subsidized. It's a conversation that we in Africa are not even comfortable to have. Look at issues like fuel, for example, which is, of course, a constant in production. If you want to speak about fuel subsidies, then a lot of African countries are either turning it into a scandal or it's not just well managed. But then agriculture, for us to feed ourselves very well, we will have to fund it properly. One way of funding is actually through subsidies. So it's a conversation that we really need to have and move it beyond the talk shops that we have. Plus, a lot of times when they actually meet, you're going to have experts and a little bit of decision makers just making it what I call summitpreneurship. It's a summit or a conferencepreneurship. So we have got summits going down, and then, of course, there is a little bit of buzz around it. And that's where it stops, because you will find key policymakers are not included in those particular conversations. And it's not aligned. Like when we're having the conversation in Dar es Salaam, how is the conversation in Dar es Salaam aligned all the way to probably when you have got local governments, where you have got states, where you have got local governments, it's not properly aligned. Like in my country, you will actually find that agriculture, for the larger part of it, bar for policy, is what we call is a devolved function. It's taken care of by the local authorities, taken care of by governors in counties. But are you going to find counties in Dar es Salaam? Most likely not. You're going to find the national government, in your case, probably the federal government, represented, but not. Then the states, or in our place, counties. So we need to align this to ensure that these good solutions that are out there find home in policy, find home in governance, and how we run our affairs back at home for them to make sense.
Okay, let's go beyond talking shop now. What is working for you, or maybe not in Kenya, but maybe across the African region, in ensuring that those who are necessary in the scheme of things in terms of getting to the communities, getting everyone, policymakers involved, and those who are going to be using those policies to be part of the process. What is working for you that you think can be replicated at a higher level so we can go beyond talking shop? I mean, solutions can come from very simple things.
Actually, first of all, is to move the issue of food production to the individual. In our case, we've devolved that, decentralizing because at the end of the day, food security is actually fought at two levels, at least from how I see it. Is that number one, food security is tackled on farms where people are doing the real agriculture, the farming. So that's the first place where that is taken care of. But then is the farmer aligned? Is the farmer aware of what is happening elsewhere? Is the farmer aware of the new technology, the new varieties that are coming up, the way to go about that? So we need to move a lot of these agency, the decision making, back to the people who actually are doing it, and not then a lot of the experts who probably are doing it for funding from elsewhere, who are doing it for study to get papers, and for government that is actually doing a lot of these things sometimes to actually just belong. So we need to move a lot of these things to the people who are actually doing the real farming. That's the first place. Second place that a lot of movement has actually been seen is at policy level, that government policy really informs how then a lot of things work down there. So we need, of course, to ensure that food security is not just a cliche, it's not just a discussion that we have out there, yet the people that do the real farming, the people that do the heavy lifting, are not part and parcel of this. They are not even aware that probably we have got a problem from how we see it. So
something key from what you just mentioned, I'd like you, something key from what you just mentioned, I'd like you to expand on is knowledge transfer. You didn't use that exact word, but that's something you mentioned in your thread of thoughts. Adopting capacity building and knowledge transfer is key. One cannot be working in isolation and expect to get the gains of new technology in improving agricultural produce. So I want to ask you, what do you think we are at here? And because this conversation is usually about looking for a solution, we'll come to the beans production thing in a bit, but let's just establish what's going on in Tanzania and what we can do with it. So how can we improve on this? You can answer that maybe by taking on an instance that has worked, that you also think can be replicated. It might not be the exact same thing, but modified and replicated across board to ensure that we don't just talk shop, like you said, at the high level, but it's coming down to those who really need it.
First of all, I will use a word that I don't know whether it's appropriate for this particular show, but then it's important for us to actually make agriculture sexy. You know, agriculture looks like telecommunications in the days of old, where it was about long cables and going up poles, and people really didn't like telecommunication technology, as it were. When my father was around, he thought that working in the telecom sector then was not one of the best things. Today, if you go to our schools, I do not know about the west of Africa, but agriculture is not one of those things that is embraced by young people. Just to surprise you, that an average farmer in Kenya is 55 years old, most likely a woman, and either literate or semi-literate or totally illiterate. So we need to actually also change perception about agriculture as a subject, agriculture as a discipline. Because food security is not going away. Technology, there could be technological advancements coming on, but it's not just going to go away. So can we find young people? And that is why I'm using the word making agriculture sexy. Is it attractive to young people? Is it packaged in a way that you can go to the university and come back home and go into food production? We have not made it attractive. And I want to actually repeat that one of those things we really need to, if you look at even the photos, the images we are using for our farmers, they are not necessarily for very youthful people, but we need to find the most youthful, because food is important. We need to find the most energetic.
To use your word, how can you actually make it attractive for a group of young people who, I don't know, might see it as physically challenging for them? Most young people, not all, most would want to say they want the soft life and they don't have to, you know, grill and grind so hard for it. And that's the mental picture you get when you talk about agriculture. Have we evolved enough? And knowing that Africa has one of the youngest population in the world, why are we failing to tap in here?
Because first of all, Africa wants to eat, but Africa does not want to go to the farm. Food does not fall from the sky. So we
you
really
said make it attractive. So I want you to, how can we make it attractive in such a way? I mean, the young people that are even in agriculture have trouble accessing funding. And then their colleagues will say, why would you be thinking about that? What's the long-term goal of going into farming? You're going to lose your crops and, you know, all those shenanigans that comes with soft life.
So then I'm talking about attitude change. I don't know whether we're going to go into behavior communication, but then I need to actually point out this, that we need to actually move away from agriculture being just about the subsistence farming that we've been doing and go into something I love to call agribusiness, where agriculture is a business. It's easy for young people to actually go around. Nowadays, it's easy for young Africans to talk about themselves being entrepreneurs, being in business. So can we actually not just talk about agriculture? Can we bring in young people? Can we, I know phrases sometimes might not really change what happens on the ground, but can we talk about the business side of agriculture? So can we talk about agribusiness? The same way for people who write. A lot of times if you see books, you see it talks about the best selling writer. It doesn't necessarily mean that that is the best writer, but the word selling comes before writer. So we need to bring in, probably enhance the agricultural side, the input side of it, the income side of it, and also ensure, speak to young people that if you're going into agribusiness, you probably are not going to be doing it physically as an individual. There's now technology in this. And the future, unfortunately, even whatever technological progress we actually embrace today, food is still going to be a constant. We will still need food. So agribusiness and agriculture is not going away. We can move very fast. The same way I was
actually
talking
more
about the
important.
telecommunication sector.
Yeah, it's
and
actually more
how today,
important
if you
than
speak about
fashion.
mobile telephony, it looks like it's a sexy thing. It's an attractive sector to work in.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, but I just had to put it out there. That's, I mean, if you don't eat, you can't look good. And you need to look good in order to do fashion. I don't know if I'm being too basic with that. Let's turn it down a bit and look at the talk about beans at this forum, the summit that's holding in Tanzania. Why do you think the campaign is so necessary? And is it truly a pathway to food security, as advocates are claiming? Okay, I think we lost him for a bit. We're going on a very short break, and then hopefully we'll get him back and conclude this conversation. Do stay with us. Hello, Mr. Adol.
No, I lost. There was static, so probably you can actually go back over the question.
Okay,
I
wanted us to talk about the Kenya Beans campaign. It's Africa-wide, not just Kenya, but there is a particular focus, and that's what I'm asking. Why is the campaign so necessary? And is beans truly a pathway to food security, as is being claimed?
You know, first of all, beans are the supplement for protein if you do not have animal protein. And whereas studies show that every dollar, at least in Kenya, the studies have actually indicated that for every dollar put in livestock, livestock can actually be, you can actually get it 4 times. It's fourfold in return. For crop production, of course, every dollar you put in, the maximum that you will actually bring out is actually a double of that particular dollar. So we've not done so well on animal production, even though we own the 4th largest herd on the continent. For food, so for beans, of course, you realize that the production period is smaller. You've got 70 days, 60 days, and we are still trying to actually get a shorter growth span for some varieties. The challenge with beans has been that it takes a little bit of time. So therefore, as much as it's nutritious and friendly, it takes a little bit of time to cook. We have come up with alternatives to ensuring that we've got beans that will actually cook faster. It's truly, in Kenya, for example, it's actually it rates as the 2nd most important food crop after maize and probably potato. So beans are important. And if you're going to come up with a basic meal that is actually balanced, you have got maize on the other side. I think the Mexicans have got a word close to something like rajas. That is a mixture of beans and maize. So the only thing then you will be missing around there would be probably vitamin. So, but then a meal of maize and beans is actually a balanced meal largely. So I think in this particular instance, the period that actually takes to grow beans, its acceptability, and that the climatic conditions around here and the weather, as it were, beans actually supplement our fight, or rather our efforts towards food security. So it's not really something that has just been plucked out there. It's something that is actually practical, it's working, and makes sense. Quite a utilitarian perspective of.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I interjected. Go ahead. Yeah, I was just going to concur with what you're saying by, referring to something the head of the Pan-African Bean Research Alliance said. It's an organization that pushes for beans as a source of food and income for the continent. He said something that the first step is to help farmers grow more beans. How can we do this?
Us do that. Of course, there's the extension. You spoke about expertise and knowledge. We still are doing things the traditional way. So it's important that we go back to doing agricultural extension. It will still go back to education, ensuring that our vocational, the TVETs, the tertiary and vocational institutions really train a lot of extension officers, and that we go back to the olden days where we had agricultural extension officers in villages. So the technological transfer, the expertise, and ensuring that farmers can move on and get information real time. Locally, we even have got systems where you will receive updates on when the rains are likely to come, the type of certified seeds that you can actually put up, the pesticides you should use, the fertilizers that you should actually put in, and how you work around to ensure that this works out. So I want to call that agricultural extension. If we work around the agricultural extension arm to ensure that farmers are well advised, equipped in time, and then now there's another aspect about putting in fertilizer, for example, subsidized fertilizer. In our instance, we've been putting out fertilizer, giving out farmers the subsidized fertilizer to ensure that we boost crop production. So it's not just about getting them certified seeds, getting them education, or rather the expertise, but also bringing in fertilizer that helps them out on that. And ensuring that for land that is not arable, it's quite arable. In our case, for example, a lot of land is acidic. And we need a lot of liming of land. We have seen local governments go out to do that, to help out and ensure that that works out properly.
All right, with all the work being out in the future, what future do you see for Africa's food security? With all the work that's being done, I beg your pardon, with summits like the one we're having in Tanzania?
I missed out on the question.
I'm just trying to find out from you, like a prediction. What kind of future with all the work that's being put in to increase Africa's food security, what kind of future do you see for us in that aspect?
I think I'll draw it from what I call the collapse of the Black Sea Initiative on grain, as much as it was helping so much of Europe. But a lot of that grain found its way to Africa. And that with the war in the north, Ukraine versus Russia, Africans are realizing that we already have got the resources. It's for us to actually ensure that we do this back at home. Our ancestors fed themselves. In those days, there were no ships that would actually bring grain from elsewhere. So the future that I'm looking at is that these conversations that we are having amongst ourselves, they're important. Of course, talk shopping is good. But it's important that for everything there is first an idea. Those ideas are vocalized. And today we are talking about the summits and everything else. So I see a place where this advocacy keeps on. And of course, the realities, the global realities then force us to ensure that we domesticate these policies. We move down to the bottom where production is done to ensure that this knowledge is there. So for me, I think it's important. And East Africa is quite a flashpoint, an important one when it comes to challenges around food security. Of course, when we talk about Kenya is the weakest in the link in East Africa, because in Tanzania, which is on our south, and Uganda on the west, they are actually quite self-reliant when it comes to
hopeful.
Food. So it's good to help a brother like Kenya. It's good to talk to each other and see how we ensure that this is done sustainably.
It is, we have a hopeful future. That's all I can get from what you say, that I want to believe we're putting in the work to secure our future. Thank you very much, Mr. Maliba Arnold, for speaking with us. We appreciate your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
All right, we're going on a short break, and when we come back, we'll be taking this conversation away from the summit in Tanzania. I'll be looking at a health-related issue, cervical cancer. That's what we'll be looking at. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. On this second half of One Slot, we'll be shifting our focus to cervical cancer. According to WHO, about 70,000 cervical cancer deaths could be averted annually in the African region if the efforts to end the disease by 2030 are urgently stepped up to ensure increased access to critical services for timely detection, care, and prevention. Health leaders and donors meeting for the 73rd session of the WHO Regional Committee for Africa recently in Gaborone, Botswana, called on countries to act swiftly to bolster essential health services to adequately address cervical cancer in the region, which is home to 19 of the 20 countries globally with high burden of the disease. What actions must country take now to speed up a change in the narrative? To speak on this, I have an ART clinician, Ibadan Humanitarian of the Year, and founder, Saving Women and Children Foundation, Dr. Dialins Noble. Thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you, Felicity. Good to be on the show.
The call, taking off the script of the WHO print, is countries are to act swiftly to bolster essential health services to adequately address this cancer. But before we amplify that call, I want you to give us a picture of what the situation is across Africa and specifically Nigeria. What are they currently doing?
Before we dive into what is currently done, I would just like to give us an overview of what cervical cancer is all about, a brief anatomy, the physiology of the reproductive system, and how cervical cancer occurs. So cervical cancer is just a cancer of the cells in the cervix. That's basically what it is. So, but for us to understand cervical cancer, I will dig deep into the anatomy of the cervix. The cervix basically has some parts. I wouldn't dwell much on it, but I'll be focusing on the endocervix and the ectocervix. The endocervix is the part of the cervix that is connected to the uterus, which is also known as the womb, and the ectocervix is the part that is connected to the vagina. The endocervix is lined by a specialized type of cell called columnar epithelial cells, and the ectocervix is lined by some specialized kind of cells called the squamous epithelial cells. So there's a space between where these columnar cells and these squamous cells meet. That space is what we call the squamo-columnar junction. This part is very, very important for us to understand what goes on in the process of cervical cancer. So that's that some parts of those columnar cells start eating or entering into the ectocervix. Yeah. So they start entering into the ectocervix, and after a period of time, that area that the columnar cells have eaten into the ectocervix forms a transformational zone. Okay. So that being said, for us to for one to have cervical cancer, one has to be exposed to a sexually transmitted virus called the human papillomavirus. This human papillomavirus has a tropicity for affecting the transformational zone. It loves to affect the transformational zone. And this human papillomavirus has over 100 strains, but there are some which we have identified and classified as high-risk strains, and we also have those which are the low-risk strains. The low-risk strains are subtypes 6 and 11, and we have found out that they don't cause cervical cancer. Rather, they cause things we call condylomata. You hear things like warts, you hear things like lesion.
Doctor, not to, I understood just a bit of what you were saying. Is there maybe a localized example that you can use to illustrate a little more what cervical cancer is? Maybe in a language that someone who is not familiar with the medical terms can easily connect to. I don't know. I know that's a bit hard, but see what you can do, please.
So for us to really understand cervical cancer, there has to be a risk of exposure to a virus called the human papillomavirus. Yeah. So this human papillomavirus goes into the body of the person and starts multiplying. This multiplication causes what we call precancerous cells. These precancerous cells, if nothing is done about it, it advances to become cancer. So there are risk factors for contracting the human papillomavirus. One of it is early coitus, which means when a woman starts having sex too early. Yeah. The second reason for this is multiple sexual partners, environmental factors like smoking. Smoking doesn't actually rest on just active smoking. Passive smoking is also as deadly as active smoking. We have issues around obesity because the challenge with obesity is that we, during our routine cervical screening, we can't really visualize the cervix. What this does is it causes delay in treatment and inability to even identify some of these precancerous cells. Human papillomavirus on its own is a self-limiting virus.